Welcome to another edition of the Eye on Life podcast for the people. Like it, share it, follow it. I know our guests, they're already doing that. They're like my biggest fans. That's the reason why. That's what gets you on the show, because the more you watch it, the more views you give me, I'll get you on the show. I also take checks, personal checks, all that. I really don't do that. That actually might be illegal. I'm talking to law enforcement here today, so I have to be very careful what I say.
Donations are fine. Donations are fine.
That's good. Donations, right? We'll call them donations. So I'm your host, Brian Boyer, Eye on Life podcast. Again, if you're watching us on YouTube, welcome. If you are listening on the many platforms, welcome as well. We're thrilled that you have taken out some of the time of your day to join us in what will be part one of a very fascinating conversation. I know I say that every week because every week we have amazing guests. So it is fascinating every week, but this week is a little bit of a different flavor. That I think that I'm personally fascinated with, and hopefully you will be as well. I do want to give a quick shout out to some listeners who have joined us over the past couple of weeks. We actually had our first listener from Germany, so I'm really excited about that. Bavaria, which I thought was very cool. One person over there, and as I always say, guys, when I see a city that's on there where I don't know anyone, that's good. It means it's not a friend or a parent or a relative. So that means people actually listen to the show that I don't know. So I guess that's good. And then I also want to call out here in the States, we had some listeners this week from Chicago, which is one of my favorite cities. So I was pretty excited about that, to get the Midwest represented as well. Thank you for listening. And wherever you're listening from, we love your city, your town, your village, your municipality. And we hope that you will spread the word wherever you may be. So thanks for that. So there are a lot of challenges these days in life. I'm noticing every day is a challenge, right? We're going through the pandemic, but it's not just the pandemic, right? We have raising children is challenging. Relationships are challenging. The economics are challenging, right? The job market is challenging. I'm finding there are a lot of very complex things these days that are just, when you get out of bed in the morning, you're like, oh dear God, what do I have to deal with today? But one of the things that I find fascinating, that I am learning every day, seems to be one of the biggest challenges in life, okay? And that is the use of the mute button. And when I say that, and I don't know if you guys have experienced this yet, but every single day, and I am guilty of it, so I'm not shaming anyone, and that's why I made sure before we started taping this today that I had the mute button off. I have yet to be in one meeting over the past 6 months, and even this goes back years now, where you ask a question and you don't hear anything, and you wonder, you sit there and you wonder, was my question so amazing that people are just breathless? Their breath is taken away by my question. And I learned a long time ago, it was not the depth or breadth of my question. It was simply the fact that they were talking while they were on mute. And I'm finding myself even having that issue these days too. And anybody who's listening, if you're working these days, or even if you're not, you're socializing with a friend, Zoom or Teams or whatever platform you use, FaceTime, whatever you use, right? That mute button seems to be an issue. I mean, we had people, and I'm talking about smart people here, PhDs, professionals with graduate degrees, all walks of life, all nationalities. In fact, if we can all come together as one nation, it's around the mute button. So I have to ask you guys, have you ever had that issue where you're talking? Because I did, and sometimes it messes with your head too, because one time I didn't even press the mute button, and I think somebody muted me, which, it does happen every once in a while. Fortunately, people can't mute me on here. But have you guys found that? Have you had it happen to you, and have you noticed it happen to others that you're talking to on any platform?
So that happens to my mom all the time. So I made the mistake of teaching her how to text, so she has basically nullified that issue by just texting me. But she used to call me all the time, and her face would hit the touch screen of the mute button, and she'd just suddenly die off. And I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? Where are you? And she's screaming into the phone that she's there, and she's getting all mad at me. And then she calls me back 2 minutes later. You hung up on me. No, you hit the mute button.
So it causes strife in families. I mean, this is a big deal. So the mute button is, and I understand why there is a mute button. There has to be a mute button. Although even then, because sometimes people will say things when they think the mute button is on, and it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen this happen. I mean, this happens even on live TV, right? With the mic, right? There's a live mic, and this just happened to a sportscaster who referenced the city being a derogatory name of a certain persuasion, and he got canned for that, or about to get canned for that. So I feel like, so let me ask you this question. This is a very important question on the Eye on Life podcast, right? Before we get to our guest today, should we just eliminate the mute button? I mean, really, what is the point?
No, but there has to be, you have to have the presence of mind to realize it's there.
Yeah,
There's
you can't
a
be
key
dumb.
to it.
Yeah, you got to be smart about it. There's a mute button in our field, and there are rules about using it for those reasons.
So if we're keeping the mute button, then I think we need some kind of technology that we can mute people as we're having a face-to-face conversation with them as well.
That would be absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And I know I know we probably heard that before. That's, but I really do believe that there's some times where even sometimes on TV, there's there's a mute button in pretty much every other part of life, right? So why not real life? I mean, and there are announcers when I'm a big football fan. There are some announcers I do not want to hear. It's better if I just put them on mute and just watch the game with no sound at all. But I just find it, I don't know, I won't harp on it, but I do find it very strange that intelligent, smart people, and again, it doesn't matter what your background is. And, we're talking about a time right now in society where we're trying to bring everyone together, right? There's a lot of division. Okay. Let's leverage the mute button to bring us together, because none of us are using it properly.
Nope.
We're all violating mute, etiquette, right? If there is such thing as mute etiquette, and I just think that there should be something done. Either get rid of it, or maybe there's some kind of training that we can go through to use it more effectively. I don't know. I do not say this as anyone I am not screaming perfection here. But even myself, I'm shocked. I'm like, oh my God, I've done it like a half a dozen times over the past week. I'm like, are you kidding me? I can't figure out the mute button. It's bizarre to me. The other question I have, and this is very random. So, when you come back from work on a Monday and you ask someone, how was your weekend? That's like a standard conversation starter, right? Sometimes, whether it could be a friend, it could be somebody at work. You say, how was your weekend? Right? That's often a conversation. That's like the kind of conversation where how's the weather, right? It's a standard way to kick off a week or to kick off a conversation. And I'm wondering, at what point is it not okay to reference the last weekend and start to look ahead to the upcoming weekend? Is it like, what's the threshold? Is it Wednesday? Like, I was on the phone with somebody today, and it's Tuesday, and I hadn't spoken to that person. I said, how was your weekend? And I asked them, I said, is that okay that I asked you that? Because that was 2 days ago now, or should I be asking you about the coming weekend? Is there etiquette? I know I'm overthinking this because this is what I do, but what do you think about that?
Traditionally, it goes to the past. It goes to the past weekend. However, if you preface it with, well, what are you doing this coming weekend? For us, we don't have weekends off.
There are no weekends for us. Our weekends are like midday, so we get all screwed up when people ask us that, because
That's true.
We start talking about our Tuesday, and people are like, no, I said weekend.
That is our
weekend. Like,
that is your weekend, right? So, and that's not just you. I mean, that's a lot of people. A lot of people. If somebody has a Tuesday, Wednesday off, on Thursday, no one's asking you how was your weekend, probably because they don't.
Right.
But I'm talking about the standard, and that does make sense. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm actually talking more about the standard Saturday, Sunday.
The standard
weekend.
Saturday, I would say probably Wednesday is the time to talking about the
Agreed.
past and to start looking at talking to the future, because
It's hump day.
yeah, exactly. Like, you're at the peak of the week and you're starting on like the downhill of the roller coaster.
But you could also tell how somebody is thinking. Are they an optimist or a pessimist? Because if they're talking about the past, that's one thing. If they're talking about the future plans, that could be another thing.
That's true. Are they a reflective person? They're remembering a special time in their life a week ago when they were doing something, or was it such a god awful bad weekend that they looking forward to the next one, hoping that it's not as bad?
Right.
I guess that could be it.
See, it is a loaded question.
It is a loaded. It's a tough one. I didn't know what the etiquette was, but we're not going to stay on that too long. The other thing, I just want to go back to the mute button. The other thing that is horrible with mute. There was a commercial about this. I forgot, it was a chip commercial or something. But when people are, when you're eating something on the phone, and you can hear that person crunching or typing away or something like that. I feel like that is one area where you have got to make sure you have to be consciously and look and make sure that mute button is on. Because most people eating is an absolutely disgusting experience. I mean, even people that have good manners, you can sit with somebody if you're not eating, and you can sit with somebody who's eating, and it's disgusting. Even if they chew with their mouth closed, it's just gross. There's going to be some sound. Let's get to some of the serious talk here. We're gonna have some fun today, but we're also going to talk about something serious. And you both mentioned that you don't have weekends, and we we talk a lot about our, our personal life on the show. It's the Eye on Life. And a big part of what we do and kind of what makes us who we are is kind of what we do for a living. And it impacts us. I mean, regardless of whether you want to say I live to work or work to live or how you feel about your job, ultimately you do have conversations about your job on a daily basis. Ultimately, it does shape who you are. It shapes the conversations that you have. It may shape your home life. It may shape how you interact with other people. But you guys are both very unique in that you're in the sector you're looking. Well, you guys are unique. Trust me, you guys are unique without the profession. I get that.
Yeah. That was
That's where you were going. I know, but you guys are unique in the sense that you're a couple, and one of you, Steffani Franek, who has been in the military, who has been a first responder, and has also been a 911 dispatcher, and George Franek, who is and we're here in Connecticut, by the way, and you guys are both based here in Connecticut as well. George Franek is a deputy. Sorry. Oh, I see. I gave you a raise already. See, a sergeant.
Hey, I'll take
Give him an upgrade.
You have the presence of a deputy. Is a sergeant with the Bristol, Connecticut Police Department, and most people who listen to the show who might not be local, when you think of Bristol, Connecticut, you think of ESPN. I no longer think of ESPN when I think of Bristol. I think of George. Actually, I think of both of you after the photos that you took. And when you go to the website, you'll see photos that George took, and they're amazing. You actually made me look human, so I appreciate that. But it's unique that you're a couple who are both in very taxing jobs, physically, mentally. And so, Steffani, I want to talk with you a little bit, and just briefly, if you just kind of give us a little bit about your background, how you got into public safety, and then we're going to get into some specific questions too, because and you always hear about this whenever there's a tragedy, and you hear about the people on the front lines. And I first want to say, especially not just today, but every day, thank you for what you do, both of you. It's not easy. There's a lot of critiquing about what you do, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But ultimately, how did you decide to get into this? Where, as we say, when most people are running away from something or don't want to deal with something, you're literally head on with it. And Steffani, I want to start with you to find out kind of why you got into this.
All right, so this is going to be like brutally honest. I think a lot of people who are watching this show, or who I'm going to tell to tune in to watch this show, that are in our fields, may or may not agree. I think some people may have had similar experiences as I have, because we all tend to have that same thread within us that puts us in this direction. But I had a lot of trauma as a kid. I had a super abusive father, and life was not fun for me as a child. But my mother was at the time a homicide detective. And so I grew up in the police department. I can name you exactly which cases she was working when, I'd have to sleep under her desk at 3 a.m. while she's typing up a warrant for somebody. And I'm, 6, 7 years old, grabbing her teddy bear that she has for, kids that she has to interview. And I'm just sleeping away under the desk, or I'm hanging out in dispatch at 1 a.m. because I was annoying my mother and didn't want to sleep. And so I hang out with the dispatchers. I would go on ride-alongs with the officers who were super nice and wanted to deal with an annoying 7-year-old. And, I just rode around my mom's jurisdiction, because what else was I going to do? So I grew up in it, and it's kind of what I knew to begin with. A lot of my family members are all from the fire department. They're all nurses. My mom's the only cop. She's the one that, stepped a little sideways for, our family traditions. But I grew up in it, and I became an explorer at 13. I was just about to turn 14. So it's a program across the nation that helps get, kids involved in this kind of stuff and gives them exposure. And I started as an explorer with the ambulance, and I never stopped. So I've been at this since I was literally 13. And there was just no choice for me. I never considered anything else. There was nothing else on the table for me. Most kids have 5 or 6 things that they're kind of dreaming of, because kids overdream. All I ever wanted to do was be a paramedic. Like, that was just it. I never ever saw anything else for myself. And I never made plans for after that, which is why it's kind of a struggle. Because when that chapter comes to a close, what do you do?
And first of all, I want to thank you for being open and honest. And when we met, a few weeks ago, and one of the things that was amazing about both of you guys was that you're real people, which was awesome. I think that's why we related well to each other. And so I appreciate you being open and honest about that. And, you say that you're 7 years old, and you were kind of tagging along almost, it sounds like, a little bit. So you got to it. So it seems interesting to me that despite being a 7-year-old, right, you're impressionable at that time in your life, you might hear things or see things that maybe a 7-year-old shouldn't hear. Maybe you're put in a position because of your personal life that you had to be more with your mom, and yet you still decided to go into it. So I find that interesting. Rather than being traumatized by that, you actually maybe embraced it at that young of an age and decided that was something that you wanted to do. Can you just explain that, how that worked in your head? Because again, as a 7-year-old, you see things different than you see when you're an adult. So, but you sounds like you kept on this track all the way through to when you were 13 and to now.
So that's an easy question for me to answer, but it can be a loaded question for others because some people may not want to get this real. People in this field like to kind of just say what people want to hear or the standard answer. My answer is not standard. Getting into this field was a coping mechanism for me. Focusing on chaos and someone else's trauma and someone else's crisis gets my mind off of my own. And I have issues deeply rooted from when I was 3 years old that I can distinctly remember that I'm not dealing with and I will never deal with because it's just too much for my 31-year-old brain to be able to handle. And I don't know that I'll ever address them, but getting into this field, the adrenaline rush, the constant motion, the constant being able to not have to focus on anything longer than 15 or 20 minutes at a time because calls are so quick for me. You know, it's move them in, move them out. And it's a coping mechanism for me. That's really what it comes down to. It's a coping mechanism for myself, for my own crap that I have buried inside.
That's a really interesting perspective. And I think that it says a lot about you as a person that you were able to take something that was maybe traumatic and you know, you call it a coping mechanism, but you're helping people. So ultimately at the end of the day, you might be helping someone that was that is in a similar position that you were in, or you're taking what was a hard point in your life or a negative in your life, but making good out of it, which I know might sound cliche, but that's very deep. And I think that's commendable to you. George, I want to talk to you as a police officer. And again, same, different type of job, but same kind of thing where you're dealing with incidents and people that the general, I shouldn't say general population, that sounds like prison, right? But most of us probably would avoid. And that's the thing I always admire about police officers. And I know we'll get into a little bit of the whole thing about police officers. We're not going to get political, but in general, at its core, you know, good police officers, right? And good people like yourself, you're putting yourself in situations that the rest of us obviously try to avoid. And so how did you decide to put yourself, and I know that this is a pun, I really don't mean it, but literally in the line of fire, going out every day and putting your life at risk? I know that, Steffi, you do the same thing, but as a police officer, you're putting your life at risk every single day.
He has it way worse than I've ever had, so.
I can imagine, and we're going to get into stories here, but I can't imagine getting up every day. And there's so much uncertainty in life these days anyway. You don't know what's going to happen to you health-wise. When you walk outside, you don't know. But clearly, when you're getting up to be a police officer, there's that added a chance for something to happen to you. So how did you decide to become a police officer?
So
I love this story.
there's a couple different points in my life where I was very fortunate to know some great officers. I grew up in East Hartford. My parents were involved in politics. But my parents also had good connections with the local police department. Because of those connections, I had some interest in going into law enforcement in like high school. Sat down, talked to a canine handler, one of our more seasoned officers, and it was like, wow, this is actually kind of cool. I could really see myself doing this. In high school, I really liked science, so I had applied to a couple schools. My goal was to go to Marist to do biology. I don't know why, I just liked biology. I didn't get it. So I kind of regrouped and I said, well, you know, I kind of like the idea of law enforcement. Maybe I'll go forensic science. So I went to the University of New Haven. I did a semester and said, nope, that's not for me. I can't be in a lab. I can't see myself working inside. I want to be outside. So I changed my degree, criminal justice, investigative services, so doing crime scene investigation. I ended up getting hired 3 days after graduating from college for my police department. And I've never looked back. The road is where it is for me. I can't leave the road. I was recently promoted. I'm a road supervisor. You get the most time with the public. You have the most face-to-face time with the public on the road. And that's kind of where I just want to be.
That's really interesting. And obviously, and the police are a public face of any town. And for those of you who may have missed the beginning, George is based in Bristol, Connecticut, on the police force there. So here in Connecticut, and it's one of the hardest jobs around. We know that. And you both talked about kind of your background a little bit. It seems like a lot of police officers are not first generation police officers or public safety in any way. It seems like a lot of it seems like families have generations. Which, again, as I was saying to you, Steffani, and again, this is where the mentality is much different. And this is why you guys do what you do and why I do what I do, right? If I saw some of the things that my parent as a police officer or a first responder, if I saw what they saw, if I, experienced what they experienced, that kind of thing, I don't think I'd want to get anywhere near that. I'd probably, bury myself someplace else. But what's so enticing about it that there's so many people that do follow in their family's footsteps that are police officers, first responders, paramedics, that kind of thing. Public safety. Why does it seem to be such a family affair?
I think we grow up on seeing the adrenaline rush from the outside, that it becomes a state of normalcy. But also, like my mom would come home and talk about like a homicide case that she worked, like gruesome details, like it's normal dinner conversation, because for us, for our community, that is normal. And I grew up hearing that. I mean, I think I was 14 years old and I helped my mom do a PowerPoint presentation for her to teach a class on a triple homicide that she had in the early 90s. And she's like, here, I have all these photos of the crime scene and I need them uploaded. I don't know how to do it. So as a young teenager, I'm making a PowerPoint presentation for a bunch of cops about like literal photos from this homicide scene. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. Not that it happened, but the details and the challenge of how to go from total chaos to how to change that and fix that situation and piece it back together so it has some sense of normalcy again. It's that challenge. And I think it gets ingrained in you. And it's tough. I can't relate to people who are into marketing or corporate America because I didn't grow up with that. I think it's all in what you grow up with. And I think that's why it ends up being a family business.
The other thing too is, especially with having kids, and it's happened because again, we're a blended family. I've had work issues where I need to run, get the kids off the bus and run back to work to finish whatever I was doing. And it's happened for both of our sets of kids.
Yep.
And it's also a camaraderie because we typically hang out with other first responders where it's, hey, this is Uncle Steve, but he's a cop. Oh, this is, Aunt Sue, she's a medic. We all tend to kind of come together and stay together.
We help raise each other's kids. Yeah. I mean, my former department, my shift sergeant, I got ordered to work an additional 8-hour shift. And my shift sergeant went to my kids' daycare and picked up my kids in the cruiser and brought them back and fed them pizza. And my kids thought it was the greatest thing ever. And all of a sudden, from that point forward, my kids are like, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a police officer. I want to be a paramedic. Because it's cool. I think it has that cool factor to it when you're a kid, and then it just never goes away when you're immersed in it.
So I'm glad you actually said that. So it sounds like to me, and I think you just answered my question. It sounds like your mom, when you were young, Steffani, engaged you in some of the work that she did, which I think is remarkable, because I think a lot of people would be scared to show their kids that. But it shows the mentality of the work and the passion and the energy that she had, and obviously you were very inquisitive about it, obviously at that point. So this is something that you would encourage your children, both of you, to do, or you wouldn't. You wouldn't.
No.
So you guys, okay. So I always wonder. That's always so you steer them clear of this, probably.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Now, why
I will
is
never
that?
tell any of, because we have 4 daughters between the 2 of us. 2 are his, 2 are mine. All of them at some point have expressed interest in going into some type of a public safety background. His oldest wants to be a nurse in an emergency room. My 2 have talked about fire department, police department, EMS stuff. We will never tell our children, no, you cannot do that. We'll never tell them or force them to do anything or to not do anything. We feel that we just give them the tools and the realness behind it. And I think that's what my mom did for me, We see the seedy underbelly of the world all the time. So for us, we don't get to have the rose-colored glasses. We see everything very inverted from everybody else. You see the good in everything, and the bad things kind of sprinkled around. You acknowledge them, but you keep going, by and large, for the general public. For us, we only see the bad stuff. We walk into a grocery store and we're paying attention to where are the exits. Why is that guy standing behind me? He looks suspicious. That person, what are they doing? You know, we're always on red alert, and we don't want our kids to be that way. So we try to I think we show our families. My mom did it for me. We're doing it by default for our kids. We show our kids kind of the garbage side of the world so that they're not surprised when they enter the workforce, that things are not all hearts and roses. And we kind of show them the reality behind that. But then on the flip side, we really don't want them to get involved, because then they're going to lead the same life that we did. And they're only going to see the bad in the world. They're only going to be able to immerse themselves in the negative to try to figure out how to fix it. And it's a perpetual battle within ourselves. So the short answer is that we will never tell our kids they can't, but we certainly are not pushing for them. We're not going to say like, oh, well, you need to get good grades to go to this school to become this.
Right.
It's you become whatever the hell you want, but we're not.
Become a lawyer, become a doctor, become something else.
Do something like on the outskirts, but don't do this. Like, you destroy your mind, you destroy your body. It's not worth it.
So that's interesting. A couple things that I want to touch on there that I find really interesting. This is what I was saying. See, this is why we're doing a part 2 after this. This is part 1. We're talking to Steffani and George Franek, married couple here in Bristol, Connecticut, both in public safety. Steffani has been a 911 dispatcher and first responder. George is a police officer, and I'm sure the dinner conversations must be very interesting. We'll get to that in a moment. I think we'll probably get into a little bit of the darker stuff in part 2, I think. But I do want to just touch on a couple of things that you just said. You kind of said, the lens that you kind of see life through, right? That you guys are always seeing things differently maybe than I would, or other people who are not in the field are, right? The rose-colored glasses, as you said. So I guess my question is, does that mean that you're not able to turn that off? I mean, is that always on your mind? When I say that mentality of, to your point, that person over there, that building's not safe, that car accident, that is it always in your mind?
It's always there. It does not go away. Like he and I both, like when we don't go out to eat very often, not because of this, because I have crazy dietary restrictions, but we don't go out to eat very often because we both jockey for position as to who gets to have their back against the wall. It looks weird when there's a couple sitting on the same side of the table and there's an empty spot on the other side, like, the opposite booth bench is empty. It just feels weird for both of us to be sitting against the wall. Typically you sit across from each other. I try to be nice and give him the ability to put his back to the wall, but I really want to be there, because having an exit behind you, having any windows or having doors that you can't see, it's a security issue. And for people in our field, like, that's a big deal. And it's tough. We can't shut it off. It's not that we're judging people. We're not.
It's more or less a threat assessment.
It's a threat assessment. That's really all it is, where are the exits? What is that person doing? That's suspicious behavior for where we are right now. Like, what's going on over there? Just this morning in Home Depot, we went to Home Depot and I find myself looking out of the corner of my eye at people. I'm watching where I'm going out of my peripheral, but I'm using, my primary vision behind my sunglasses. Like, why is that guy standing so close to me? Why is she coming toward me? And it's just this red alert, this, DEFCON 5 kind of thing, where we're always here when the rest of the world exists here. It's a threat assessment. It's a security issue.
So how do you live in any peace then? I mean, and
you don't.
You don't. So for example, and let's use, a time during the day that's supposed to be peaceful, right? Is when you sleep. And anybody who's watched or listened to the show before knows that I don't sleep, but it's for a much different reason than you guys not sleeping. I just can't fall asleep at night. And, that's an issue, just, the clock, the clock that you're on and everything like that. But so you're saying you really can't live a quote unquote normal life.
No.
And so how do you sleep at night? You're saying you don't sleep, or in other words, when you go to bed, are you dreaming about something that you saw that day or something that happened? I mean, I know we talk about PTSD, right? And I don't know if you both have that. I imagine that there's got to be some of that.
A lot of that for us.
What kind of PTSD or anxiety do you have, and how do you overcome that to function? Because you're as I said, you're both amazing people. We conversed. We had a great conversation, right, when we met. You guys are taking great Great photos, right? And I mean,
Thank you.
clearly you were focused on that. You have a nonprofit, which we're going to talk about either this show or next show. So there are things that you're doing in life that are quote unquote normal, right? So it's not like you're not functioning. You're functioning as down to earth, nice people that have hobbies and careers and all that. So what are some of the things that weigh on you, and how do you overcome that when you're sleeping, when you're at the dinner table, even in your relationship?
So even just the other night, this goes back probably a couple of weeks. There's, we have a deck with some furniture. It's about 2:00 in the morning, excuse me. And all of a sudden there is this thud, and it's not a thud that I've ever heard before. It's not a normal sound. It's 2:00 in the morning. First assumption, somebody's trying to break in. Something's going sideways. Get up, flashlight, possible firearm.
Rifle.
double checking. It was the wind. The wind had caught the umbrella, kicked it up, slammed it back down.
We forgot to close the umbrella. Very simple thing that most people deal with. People forget to close the umbrella. We hear a thud and we both automatically wake up out of a deep sleep, and it's, we look at each other and it's go time, because God forbid someone tries to break into the house, but that's the problem. Our mind goes to worst case scenario all the time.
Right.
It's trauma all the time. He has panic attacks. He just recently kind of started being super open about it. I don't know if you want to talk about it directly.
So again, through the course of my career, I've seen and done a lot of different things. Even just this week was an anniversary of one of the incidents that happened to me. And especially at night, just before I start falling asleep, it's a full bore panic attack. Sometimes it's easy to just kind of breathe through and calm down and maybe just go on the phone, distract myself. However, there are times where it's just, hey, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And it's overwhelming.
And it's not a typical panic attack like you see with people who get just generalized anxiety, because there's regular, like, everyday people that have this as well. It's not specific to us, but his panic attacks specifically are the only thing I can speak to. But I mean, we're talking like screaming bloody murder, it appears that he's writhing in pain, but he's not. It's just this, I have to run, but I can't because I'm laying in bed and there's nowhere to run. And I have to physically lay my body weight on top of him to calm the parasympathetic nervous system to get it to calm down. I mean, it's rough for us. I wake up with night terrors, drenched in cold sweat. And he works midnights now, so I sleep by myself, which for the majority of our relationship, I've never had to do. And it's really hard because I'm up most of the night because I'm constantly, I hear a sound outside and it's, all right, well, now I have to take the role of him and me if someone's trying to get into the house. And we're always very jumpy and jittery, and a lot of us in this field get forced to live that way. And it's a byproduct of our career, and we try to hide it. We try to stay very quiet about it, to live a normal life, to let our neighbors believe that we're normal. And, but we don't have that ability. It's been, basically forced out of us. We just don't have the ability to shut it off.
So it sounds, there's a lot there to that, obviously.
Yeah.
And
aren't you glad you asked?
and that's why, and I think that I am glad I asked, because I think it's important that people understand that that's what a lot of people in this field go through. And I think that's extremely important when we judge in certain ways and whatnot. But I guess my question, and when you're talking about this anxiety and some of these terrors and kind of always being in go mode and that kind of thing, right? Is that, and this might be an obvious question, but that's a result of experiences that you've had in the field. And I think we're going to wait for show 2 because I want people to come back, because I think people are maybe a little fascinated by maybe some of the things that you see. I know I am, and we'll talk very frankly, as you guys do, right? But I imagine that you guys have seen some things that are not something that most of us ever want to see, ever want to hear about. Even when it's in a movie, when it's not real, we cringe. We have nightmares from a movie, and you guys are living this real life horror, right? So it sounds like it's probably from that. But I guess in addition to the experiences that you've had and how that plays into what's going on in your brain, how do you cope? How do you start the nonprofit? How do you take the photos? How are you able to be parents? How are you able to be a couple that, hey, you guys, as I said, you're great. You seem to get along really nicely, which is great. And we're going to talk about how you met in just a second here, because that we're getting in today. But there's so many things in life that you guys are doing despite these dark pieces of your life that you're experiencing based on what you have chosen to do for a living. So how do you cope, and how do you sort of create, and let's call normalcy what it is, put it in quotes, right? Normalcy. But how do, right, exactly. But how do you function based on everything that you're just telling me? Because you are functioning, and you know, you're doing what you need to do. George, you're still doing what you're doing. As I said, you're doing a lot of things. You're still a police officer. You're still out there doing it. You're still coming home and having dinner and going out, even if you are near the exit, right, or facing away from the wall. You're still going out. How do you do that? How do you sort of, when you come home at night, not necessarily leave it all out there, but how do you cope with it after you've left the quote unquote office for the day?
So a lot of a younger me would eat, sleep, and breathe law enforcement. I was just there. I was heavily involved in Special Olympics, police explorers, overtime, you name it, I did it. And when we had met, we had been together about 1.5 years, 2 years, and Steph had basically said to me, "You are miserable. Why?" I don't know. I have to work overtime. I need to make bank. And it was through a conversation, it's like, wow, Steph had said, like, why don't we try to find you a hobby? Let's try to find you something outside of work to do. I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm not an artist. I can't draw anything. Stick figures elude me. That's how bad of an artist I am.
I'm with you on that one, by the way.
Yeah.
I was terrible at Pictionary.
Yeah, yeah. But Steph had said, hey, why don't you try photography? So we went to BJ's, bought a kit camera, and I just started taking photos. And then it was, wow, all right, I'm really enjoying this. And it was a creative outlet. It wasn't until that moment of actually finding something outside the norm, outside of what is expected, that it was like, wow, there is something outside of the badge or the job. And I've grown quite a bit, but it's also, I'm in a position where I have now younger officers who I have to keep tabs on, but it's also, hey, how are you doing? And lately, a couple of them have picked up photography as a hobby, and they're using their cell phones, and they're taking great photos. But a lot of times we get into this career field, and we live, breathe, and sleep it. Where we are now is there's things outside, because the world can be a deep, dark place. There's still beauty in it. We just have to choose to see it.
We have to go find it. Right. And for him, it's viewing it through a viewfinder on a camera. And it allows that ability to separate, because I was in the same position for years of my life. You know, I worked commercial EMS, and I was doing 80 hours a week paid. And then it was, well, I've still got 20 or 30 hours a week that I'm awake and not doing anything. What do? I'm going to go volunteer for 2 other ambulance services, because what else do I have to do? So for a lot of us, like, our career is our hobby, whether we do it for free or we work the overtime, where there's nothing outside of work. And, you know, for him, finding a hobby was imperative, because he was in such a place that, like, I'm not sure that we would have survived, like, with a relationship, because he was so miserable and so stressed out all the time.
Well, I have to say, I'm absolutely flattered that you're talking about beauty and photography, and I assume that you're using our photo shoot as an example.
Absolutely. But that's the whole thing is.
Hey, why is Stephanie laughing at that? Why are you laughing at that? I was being serious.
But while
I was going to say, you're beautiful.
Yes, right, I'm sure.
But while we were out doing the photo shoot, the pride flag that was painted, the beauty that was the background, first responders typically lose sight of that. We're focused on other things. Now I'm in a place where I can sit here and say, wow, that was really pretty. We had a great time, and that time flew. Like, I looked at her after we were done, and we're like, dude, that was really that long? Like, it felt like it was 10 minutes. What the hell happened?
Right.
But I think you touched on a good point where, you know, the old us, we see, and as first responders in general, people who work the road, you see graffiti all over the place. And my first thought is like, gee, I wonder which scumbag gangbanger put that up, you know, or what does that mean? Like, what's going to kick off now because some gang symbol got put up? And most people just see it as spray paint on a wall. We know that there's symbols behind it, and we know what those symbols mean. It's like, great, I wonder what's coming now. But through a viewfinder in the camera, And just being next to him while he's doing this, because I don't do photography, but being with him when he does it, it's wow, like those colors really pop in that image. Like, and we don't see at that time that it's graffiti from a gangbanger. It's the colors and it's art. And we're able to have that degree of separation now that neither of us have ever been able to have in this field.
So it sounds like photography then is really part of your escape. That's kind of where you see. So, and when we say see life through a lens, literally, right? In that kind of lens. And for those of you watching or listening, we did a photo shoot recently right here in West Hartford, Connecticut Center. There's an area called Blueback Square, and there's a pride flag. There are a bunch of pride flags all over. And George did a great job. Both George and Steffani did a great job incorporating that into some of the photo shoot, from a diversity standpoint. And it really was actually, they were actually beautiful shots that you put together. I almost felt like I should leave the photo to really make them beautiful. But it is interesting though.
That's the whole thing is you added to the beauty of it.
Oh, I appreciate that. See, see that they want a part 3. That's why they're saying this. Forget part 1 and 2, part 3. We are again. I want to save a bunch of things for the next show because I want to break these up because there's a lot more to talk about. But I do want to sort of end this segment on a positive note. And again, you're listening to the Eye on Life podcast. Like us, share us, follow us. You can find me on Facebook, YouTube, eyeonlifepodcast.com. You can email me. And I will get back in touch with you. And I appreciate the support and the listening and the time that you take to listen or watch the show. So please do that. We're going to have a part 2 here with George and Steffani. But before we go here, I do want to ask you a very, very important question. And you know what I'm going to say. So when we met, and I'm really not just saying this, and I think you actually did tell me the story, but I want our audience to hear. You two seem like, first off, as individuals, just very genuine people, which I find which I really do say is I say that's sometimes very hard to find these days. There are a lot of people, trying to be something that they're not. Not everyone. There are great people around. I know a lot of great people, a lot of great friends, but I did see that right away with you guys. Not that you need my validation, but I did see it. And you literally generally seem like you're in love and everything that you're going through right now, right? Are you going to kiss on here? We're going to keep this PG, right? There you go. See, that was like that was the kiss cam. It was like the kiss cam at the beginning, right? But the thing that we've covered today, which I find absolutely just fascinating, right, is the fact that you're both in these very stressful fields, and yet you came together. You have a relationship. You have your family, and you do seem like very family-oriented people because you both talked about your family. So I want to ask you a question, a 2-part question before we end here. How did you guys meet? Okay. And I don't want to hear about the back of an ambulance or anything like that, okay?
No,
keep it clean here, okay?
No.
But how did you meet? And the fact that you are in such stressful occupations and can relate to each other probably, and you guys can probably relate to each other, whereas somebody else who's not doing what you do might not be able to relate to the stories that you tell and the feelings that you feel, right? So my 2-part question is, how did you meet, and how has what you do collectively helped your relationship?
Hey, please take this one. I tell it so much better.
There's no wrong answer. I don't want to cause any trauma from that question.
She does tell it better though.
We're holding hands under the table right now. So we met on Match.com. That's just it. But it was funny because I winked at him first, and he messaged me, but I saw in his profile that he was in the criminal justice field. And I remember I was like, oh, he's cute. Like, I'll send him a wink. And then I read through the profile and I'm like, oh, he's probably a cop. And for me, as a dispatcher, I see how some cops can be. And commitment and monogamy is not always their thing. And I didn't have an interest in battling that. So I was like, oh, if he's a cop, it's a no for me. Just because I work with cops all day, like I know how they are. And I know that's a huge like generalization and stereotype that shouldn't exist. But like I've seen it and I didn't want to live that life. And I didn't want to be a Leo wife. Like I don't want that stress. I didn't think I wanted it anyway. And so we started messaging, and like the moment we started talking, like we have literally never stopped. Like I would work midnights, he worked day shift, he would come and see me and not sleep all night, and then he'd stay up with me all night on the phone at work. And
yeah, there were some days I was like,
I don't know how he functioned with a lack of sleep. 3 monsters deep,
just trying to stay awake, but we made it work. But the biggest thing is it's funny because over the course of just meeting and talking, we knew pretty much right from the first conversation, like, hey, there's something here that neither of us have seen before. I told you that you loved me first.
He did. He informed me that I loved him.
She informed me that we were getting married.
Yes,
so
I
there's
did.
that.
So you're saying there's balance in the relationship, clearly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm not the one who wears the pants. She definitely picks them out. But that's the whole thing, is working in the first responder realm. Yes, we have different sides of the houses that we work, but we understand each other better because of it. If I'm having a bad day, she knows, hey, if you need something, I'm here, but I'll be over here. Or if it's a moment where it's, hey, I see you're stressed, what can I do to help? What can I do to help you right now? We understand each other on a very different level, which is great, but there's usually a lot more to it. It's not just hey, I burned dinner. It's, I had a really, really bad day and this happened. All right, let's deal with it.
Everything is just so much deeper for us. And I think, last night, because I don't know if people know this, but Brian, you emailed me some basic questions of what we could touch on for the length of the podcast or whatever. And I had written you back that, there might be some tears with some of them because they're really personal for us, but they need to be put out there. And George and I had probably a 2 or 3 hour conversation about the questions that you emailed us. And we both cried to each other because they strike nerves. And it was, I'm nervous. Like, what do I say for these? And can I get real? And then it broke away from how do we talk on the podcast to let's just talk about this stuff with each other. And first responders tend to stick with first responders. It's like fun to play in relationships with the general public, but at the end of the day, first responders stick together because we're the only people who understand us.
We're like the broken toys from Toy Story. We all just kind of hang out together.
This is not uncommon.
Well, it's interesting that you talked about the conversation they had last night, and I do like to make sure my guests are prepared. We try to do that, but it's not. It's the guests that make those questions come to life, not me. The show is about you, not me. But I do want to just I do want to add that again. This Eye on Life podcast is about real, authentic conversation, and you guys are the epitome of that. And it's a very unique. Yeah, you have a very unique story. The fact that you are together, the things that you've done as a police officer, George, and Steffani as a first responder, 911 dispatcher. So today we have gotten a little chance to know you, which is great. And thank goodness I did not try to fit this all into one show because there was absolutely no way. And Steffani said that to me right away. I was pretty much planning 2 shows. And then going back to that she said you're marrying her, she basically told me I'm doing 2 shows, which.
Welcome to my existence.
Exactly, which. And I liked it. I was happy about it, actually. I was glad, I was thinking about it anyway. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer. And to be honest with you, I'm not messing with either one of you. So want to stay on your good side. But I do just want to say thank you for being so open and honest about your personal lives and your professional lives. And as we conclude this part 1, okay, we're talking to George and Steffani Franek, first responder, 911 dispatcher, and police officer. Public safety and kind of the impact that has on their lives and family and kind of how they got to where they are today. The next show, and we'll tease this out a little bit so people come back, we are going to get into a little bit of the darkness. We're going to keep it a little light too because we are going to talk. So a couple things that I want people to be aware of for the next show, which you'll see on social media as we start to promote it. You guys are working on a nonprofit, which we're not going to get into right now, but we're going to talk about a nonprofit. We're going to give contact information. You guys are going to give us your contact information in the next show so people can get involved. We're also going to give you a chance to talk about your photography business. So I want people. It's amazing work that you do. You are true artists in that, so that's amazing. We are going to talk about. So I did say the show is not about me, but I did do a police ride along once in Buffalo, New York. And I do just want to relate that a little bit. It was interesting, but I will say that people are going to look at me like, you're the biggest wimp after hearing them, the way I reacted to some of the things that I saw, which was really nothing that bad, trust me. But we are going to talk about some of the things that you guys have seen. And so in the next show, we talk about tears and maybe even graphics. I do want to let people know that we are going to talk about some of the things that you guys have seen, not to glamorize or anything like that, but to discuss a little bit about the the trials and tribulations of the job. I think it's important that people know that. So again, we're not doing it for shock value, but we are going to talk about it because I think we'd be remiss if we didn't. And the other thing I want to talk about is with both of you, and probably even more so George, is the role of law enforcement these days, and maybe how it might be a little bit more challenging in 2020 to be a police officer than it was maybe back in Mayberry with Barney Fife and was Andy Griffith, right, on the Andy Griffith show. Mayberry was maybe a little bit different than Bristol and any other law enforcement community these days. So I want to talk to you a little, not to get, we're not going to get political, but I do want to talk about the role and how that has changed and how it's become more challenging for you and really for both of you and what you do. So you guys have been awesome. Thank you for joining us on the Eye on Life podcast. This is just part one. I'm excited for next week. That's going to be awesome. So part 2 will be next week. We'll talk more with Steffani and George about some of those topics. And in the meantime, I hope you guys will join me in keeping an eye on life. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.